for the internet. And so wherever this laptop is pointing, you're gonna be on the internet. And so we usually leave out this side of the room for anyone who wants to opt out or who happens to be sitting in that part of the room, just out of respect to everyone. I'm going to do some introductions, and then I am going to do troubleshooting and other things.
We're going to do a presentation?
Yeah.
Projector. We need to get out the projector.
Yeah, can I try that? Yeah. Thank you.
From the same computer, or you want to use another?
People can plug in their own.
No.
Oh.
If you're doing the presentation, videoing
Yes.
for the internet, you
Yes.
presumably want to do the presentation from a different computer than the video.
No, I can figure that out.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's okay.
She's from the media lab.
It's where the future comes from. Actually, you know how it is. Okay. With love. They're very kind to always let me in the building. So this is the New England Complex Systems Institute, for those of you who are not familiar with it. We have semi-regular salons here, which are super fun. And we talk about a wide variety of topics, but always from a complexity science standpoint. So what are the underlying patterns of things? What are the nifty fulcrums that we can leverage for an entire system, things like that. And today we're going to focus on something that is nearest and dearest to my heart, or one of the many things which is nearest and dearest to my heart, which is disaster and humanitarian response, and what complexity looks like in that space. So we're going to have a couple of different people checking in, giving talks. We have one or two people that will join us remotely eventually and that we'll hear from, and then we're going to have a group discussion. So first, let's do introductions. So this is an icebreaker question that I have been wanting to ask for a while. So name who you are, where you're from, and also one publishing house or record label or some sort of production thing that you wholeheartedly love. Okay, so is there one television channel or movie studio or whatever else? Yeah? Let's think about that for a second. I'm Willow Brew. I spend a lot of time with a lot of different groups. My full-time work is with a group called Aspiration, based out of San Francisco. I love organizing these events at Exie because it gives me language for things that I wouldn't otherwise have. And my unit is a thing called Ninja Tune Records because they put out delightful music that is consistently really good. It makes me happy. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul. Let's see. Favorite channel I can think of is AMC. For The Walking Dead, mostly.
Good, thank you. Anne, how about you?
I think I like The World.
The what?
Marco Mormon, The World.
Okay.
I like it.
Thank you.
The closest fastest thing I can think of. Who are you?
Oh, Anne. Thank you.
I'm Tina. I also like cake when it's presented like that. Thanks, Willow, for the invitation to also speak. So then you will hear a bit about me. I'm currently working here as a visiting fellow with the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. I've been saying that in real life. So my full-time job is at the small university of Norway, where I'm co-directing a center on integrated emergency response, and I'm there a professor in ICT. Oh, and I'm mostly busy with thinking about the editors like Springer and Elsevier that I don't like. I don't know what.
Thank you.
My name is Brian. I'm visiting from Fort Myers, Florida. My friend Arnon. And I think production, something along those lines, would be Victor records made before 1924. Acoustically recorded recordings.
Awesome, thank you.
Do we have a link for the online thing?
Yep, I'm taking care of all of that right now.
Is it set up?
Yes, it's set up, it's going. There's Marie right now. Hey, Marie. Soon we'll have Sarah, and I'm about to post the link to the internet also for the.
Okay, post
for
the
the-
link, so I'll be looking.
Arnon, how about
Hi,
you?
yes, I'm Arno. I'm the pride of Somerville, and I'm all about blues, folkways, records. I can't get enough. Is that chair unoccupied over there?
That one's
Please share some.
And it's true. It's space. I really like this chair.
Okay, good.
Great, thanks, man. I'm Sam. I'm from Cambridge, and I think my favorite publisher is probably the government of Norway. The little things that come out of Norway are just priceless.
Thank you. It is, what is one like publishing house or film studio or record label, like one house that you like the things that come out of?
Okay. My name is Om Geckerman. I work for IBM. I'm fascinated and very interested in disaster resiliency. I think, I don't know the actual name of the body that was created, but Dr. Nico is very deep in my heart. So that's.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gary Dreyfus, and I am among other things the major domo each year at the Ig Nobel Prize ceremonies. And I've been in a coma for 20 years, so I don't know anything about your modern world of publishing, but maybe I'll find out something.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'm George Mokray.
Oh, that's my George.
I know. I'm an independent scholar from San Francisco. I publish weekly. It's what's happening at the colleges and universities and the community back energy and other things, whether it be whatever I'm interested in. And years ago, there used to be a publishing house, a small publishing house, that Eli Wellens, who was of 8th Street Books, and then eventually was the bookstore manager at Yale University. He did a series of publications on Athenaeum Corinth, which were historical documents. So the log from the whale ship Essex, or accounts by people who had been captured by Indians in the 17th century, 18th century, and the 19th century. So original documents and tales that people were telling back then. Really excellent. Thank you. It's a great book.
Thank you.
I'm Matthew. I'm the science writer here at Nike. I use a say landscape.
Thank you.
I'm Francisco, was not here. I don't know, I like the BBC TV series from the 80s.
Hi, I'm Vincent. I'm a researcher here at Nike. I would say Super Giant Games, so a game studio that
I'm Joe Morgan. I'm a postdoc here at Nexi, and I guess I would have to say it's Knowledge Press, which is the in-house publishing here at Nexi. So such classics as Dynamics of Complex Systems, Making Things Work, among others.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nisha Shattuck. I'm a researcher at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, and I research civil military coordination in large-scale international foreign humanitarian assistance and disasters. And I would have to go with participant films. So they've done things like Good Night and Good Luck for Charlie Wilson's War, and then they also help fund documentaries and documentaries. Thank you.
Well, I'm Ben Dornberg. Actually job hunting. The house, so there's a website I've gotten really into called Huffduffer, which basically lets you make your own like podcast feed where you aggregate other people's podcasts. So there's some random consultant in San Francisco called AuburnCom that has like a really good collection of sci-fi and technology and politics and sociology podcasts kind of aggregated. So that's my current favorite.
Thank you.
I'm Rafi. I'm also a researcher at Nexi. I probably have to go with multi-world because writing and videos for augmented.
Hi, I'm Alfredo. I'm a postdoc here at Nexi, and I would agree with Francisco, the BBC. Favorite producer.
Okay, I'm Gideon Baryan. I'm president of Nexi. I don't know that I have a particular house. Unfortunately, if you ask me this question, I have to just go back to composers or pianists or somebody. So composer would be Beethoven, pianist would be Sirkin. So that would be my frame.
Great, thank you. All right, so I've been terrible about remembering who I asked to present at this. I know Tina, and I know that I'm ready. Did anyone else come with something that they want to talk about today? Specifically, like in plenary before we do discussion? Okay, we're gonna do that, and if Sarah joins us, then we'll go for that. Tina, sorry, Marie? And there's Sarah, awesome. Okay, so do you want to lead us out and just give us an overview? Do you want the projector?
I would like to project, but I'm just going to start with a couple of points that I put up as a general introduction.
This for you. I just turned it on, so it's thinking. Cool.
Yep. And is that fun?
Hey, Internet. So, Internet, you can ask us questions by posting to @NECSI, which is short for New England Complex Systems Institute. This is Tina. She's going to talk to you now, and you're going to stop looking at my face. Yay!
Yeah, I will use that in a minute. But so thanks again for giving me the opportunity to talk, because I think it's one of the really interesting and exciting fields, the disaster response. I don't know how many others of you have been looking at disasters. I think I did.
Okay.
So how's your general? Have you? I know that you have, but the general familiarity with why people say disaster environment is different from your usual business. So because one of the things that are really important about disasters is to understand that disaster response starts by the people who are affected. And there are huge discussions around how we should call even these people, if it should be beneficiaries or just affected communities, putting them at some point. But those people are actually invariably those who start responding to a disaster. So it is not the humanitarian response, the great UN people that then fly in and save whatever community is there. It is the people who are present on the ground who build up their own lives and livelihoods on that. Aid has then ideally the function to support these local people and not replacing it or substituting it. Now I have been working also on looking at new information technologies and trying to figure out ways that they can support these communities in these processes, also by connecting them to volunteer communities that are out there. And there have been some tremendous achievements. I think Sarah will probably later on talk about what they have been doing with Ushahidi. So since the Haiti earthquake, this has become really one of the major sources of information, both for the professional responders as well as, yeah, I know it's not there yet. Okay. As well as for also trying to connect back to people on the ground. In parallel to this process of enabling and bringing together people who are working jointly on a disaster response, there is somehow that idea that information that is out there on the internet can be harvested. It's also one of the terms that I don't really like, or that whole notion of crowdsourcing, so just harvesting data that's out there on Twitter to make a great map and put something up, and a map or another information product. And that has led to a tendency where then organizations or state authorities use this information to stay in a feeling of control. So instead of using these technologies to support the people on the ground, it is just harvesting data to control a process. And along with that, then also often reporting cycles that violate humanitarian principles, for instance, reciprocity. So not giving back, just collecting data, feeding it into information products, and then potentially using it or not for instance, advocacy. So, yeah, and pushing back on this development then leaves open the question what can be done to enable the people who are on the ground to not only be seen as something that you can easily harvest information from, but to enable them to collectively engage with volunteers and other groups that are out there to build their own response in ways that are fitting for the context that are in it, not just going in and saving them. So that's more a general introduction, and I'll, because I've been working, I'm European, as you can all hear. I'm actually German. I hope that will work now. So I have been working in the recent month, and probably also a lot of others have, on the refugee crisis, because that has had a tremendous impact on Europe, and there are some interesting phenomena that can be explored by using that as an example. I will start. I hope the internet can also see that. So there was initially that claim by the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who said, "We will manage. We will manage to somehow." She said, "We've managed to deal with the banks and the financial crisis. We can also help 4 million refugees from Syria, because Europe is a big continent, has 500 million people. So what are 4 million then?" That has not been too well received. That is both in Germany and around Germany. Also in part because refugees are not as easy to control as some people would like to have it. There is that notion or an astonishment that actually also refugees are using smartphones as their lifelines. So there is really, it's a non-politically correct headline, but of course it should not come as a surprise that people these days use Google Maps to navigate. They use WhatsApp to chat with each other, and they use Facebook to stay in touch with their family wherever they are. And smartphones are not that expensive more, but if you go on such a journey into Europe, it's one of the key investments that you should make. And it's really astonishing, or it was astonishing to me, how many people were struck by the fact that refugees have a smartphone, as if they were all too stupid to realize that potential and buy one.
Can I ask you something about that? I'm not astonished that somebody could have a smartphone in their pocket. I am astonished that as they go from Syria to somewhere in the Balkans, that they can get on a network that will actually recognize the service that they paid for back home and still give them connectivity without charging them $90 a minute or something like that for being out of network.
There's Wi-Fi. I mean, Wi-Fi hotspots are being also set up now as a part of the humanitarian response. There are a couple of activists setting that up, but there's also Starbucks more or less all over the place, and that's also what I normally do when I'm coming from Europe to the States, for instance. I just go to the nearest Wi-Fi hotspot.
Our cell phone experience in America is very different from the rest of the world. Swapping SIM cards and using data.
Yeah.
In most airports, when you arrive, there's a SIM card vending machine, and you just have access to the network there when you arrive, rather than the U.S. way, which is like you have to pay your carrier in advance in order to have access to the internet and whatever else when you get there. There, you just combine the SIM card and pay it. You have your phone number. It's not your phone.
The last time I was in Europe was 10 years ago, and I came from England over to the continent, and as soon as I sat down in a park or in my hotel, the message came on the phone. I had that message, so you can use your phone over here. And as soon as I turned it on, in about 5 minutes, it drained 40 pounds out of.
That was
So
probably
things have
roaming.
changed.
Yeah, things have changed. But there are also more and more really Wi-Fi hotspots. There are also cities that offer
citywide free Wi-Fi. It's not that it's super speed for Wi-Fi, but it's sufficient to send a WhatsApp message.
So I look forward to when PBS NewsHour, and those folks, and there are people who are selling SIM cards there to refugees and safety.
Yeah.
Give them away.
Yeah.
You said there were groups that were setting up Wi-Fi spots specifically for the refugees. What groups are they?
For instance, NATO is right now setting up large-scale operations all across the Balkans, but also a couple of volunteer communities, and that is along the routes. That's not only on our network, certainly, but it's also up to Berlin.
There are a lot of local ISPs and connectivity activist groups, specifically in Germany and especially in Berlin, who go out of their way in order to set up Wi-Fi for other people, including in other
Yeah, but another part of information is then, so governments are losing control over what is communicated and how it is. And for instance, that was an advert published by the Hungarian government in one of the Jordanian biggest newspapers, basically, like you probably also can see that on the internet, saying Hungarians are hospitable, but the strongest possible action is taken against those who attempt to enter Hungary illegally. They say that's part of informing refugees of the odds they may face during their journey. Do not listen to the people smugglers. Hungary will not allow illegal immigrants to cross its territory. So not only is that trying to make an attempt to scare people away, it's also clearly not conflicting with other information where people are constantly crossing Hungary. So it is an interesting attempt to keep the floods back and keep the people where they are.
You said that was in a Jordanian newspaper?
Yeah.
And you know, was it sort of transparent who supplied that message?
Government of Hungary. There's a special thing about the government, the present government of Hungary, which has been using politically the Roma people as scapegoats for many, many years, and so there are domestic political reasons why they've been so hard on refugees.
I mean, the government of Hungary is for me not a democratic government, and it's a shame that they are in the European Union still with that government, and that we have tolerated that for too long, and that we still accept that regime, which is, I mean, part of the crisis certainly is political and can only be solved by the European Union as such, but that also entails planning. So we had last week, supported by HHI, a refugee summit organized in Brussels, where we brought together UN agencies, volunteer groups, but also some state actors who are completely overwhelmed with handling the refugees that are coming in part also because they don't know who is coming, when they are coming, from where they are coming, and what they will need. The German government, that's also a bit older now, has scaled up the numbers of refugees they are planning for from 400,000 to 800,000, then to 1 million, and now they are debating between 1.5 and 2. Now, that's the difference for a country that has around 80 million people and has to deal with that in a very short time. An interesting attempt to deal with that is the EASY distribution system. That acronym really is a splendid intervention of German bureaucracy. So they are trying to allocate refugees to states, the federal states in Germany, according to quota that take into account some regulations. Now, what you can imagine is that refugees who made their way from a war in Syria somewhere out through the Balkans up to Germany will not in all cases be very happy to be distributed then according to an easy bureaucratic allocation system. And that has also overwhelmed the government, and then you can imagine that there are all kinds of conflicts popping up between the authorities, some of the more nationalist conservative people who are there, and the refugees. That's one of my my favorite quotes. So the authorities tell me to sleep and eat. I say, give me a job. Really, that trying to build up the livelihood again, which we very often don't see as a part of disaster response, but it is clearly a need. Every day I sleep and I eat, and I don't like it. I didn't come here for the food. It's surprising, it's Germany. We are known for our cuisine. I have better food in my own country. So starting to think also the response from a more long-term perspective and really empowering those people who want to build up something. They don't want to be in that position where they are just beneficiaries and disempowered. Information for whom? I said it in the beginning of my talk. Information should support decision makers, and from my perspective, increasingly, decision makers are people on the ground who want something, need to build up their livelihood. But the overall, that's a taxonomy from a workshop in 2012 in Geneva on decision makers' needs in sudden onset disasters. You see, and I thought it was a very appropriate picture for a complex systems institute, because there are many different actors who are involved or affected by a disaster response, and all of these do have different interests. And these interests can range from military power, political interests, up to very, very economic interests. And the question is I think we can see in the information environment who is most important power-wise in that game. And we are living in times where information is power, and although we have open data sharing and open internet, information is owned. I can also share that if you're interested.
But you just read a few of them, because it helps inform what this is really about. So,
for instance, here we have the military, for a signal. We have here donors who are often a forgotten power, and certainly some of the most interesting actors. We have international organizations, we have the public sector, we have media, so very different actors. And I can share also a link with you if there's some interest in the follow-up on the full report, looking at who is affected and who is playing there. And it's that's just the decision makers. So the actors are agencies. You can also imagine that all of these actors do have different decisions that they make. So trying to steer information towards that is difficult. And my impression is that either a lot of information is fed upwards, very aggregated way to feed the media or feed some headquarter level decision making, or it is shared in very different ways across social networks. And the question is, how can we bring that collective power together to really enable people? Okay, that's it from my part. I know I've extended this 5 minutes tremendously.
It's great. Any questions or comments specific to Tina's?
You didn't say very much about the specifics of what you are doing.
Yeah.
Talk about the general situation. You just say a couple of minutes about it.
Yeah, talk about that while I set up.
Yeah, okay. So I have been working on risk assessment and decision support in various disaster situations. I've started off working on crisis management and critical infrastructures, looking at how networks of people can be created, and people and the machines and the powers of technologies that they can be using. So how can we create networks of experts that are working together to solve specific problems? That's how I started, for instance, logistic problems. Then I realized, okay, it's very nice. We have a lot of optimization literature that is dedicated to single problems. Unfortunately, the world is not that simple, and linear optimization doesn't solve it all. So I ventured into the disaster environment where decisions are clearly nested, they are interdependent, and they are also very often unstructured and ad hoc, and there is not a clear, something like a clear objective function to it. subscribe to it. So how can we deal with such situations? And my future plans are moving more and more also into citizen science, engaging people on the ground to also really build their own model and come up with their own ideas, other than me sitting at my desk or whatever I'm working also in Rust environments, coming up with ideas for them. Yeah, almost.
I'm really fascinated by this work. I think it's a very important direction to go, especially for the citizen science part. And I'm curious if you come across the conflict between decision makers and power brokers and these citizen networks. I mean, citizens seem to have trouble creating networks. It's a matter of whether those networks are accepted as influential or valuable by the power brokers. Can you talk about that conflict a bit?
Yeah, I think it's very visible in this refugee crisis, because you have on the one hand the refugees that want to make their way through that. Then you have governments, and we saw the attitude of the government of Hungary, who basically do not want that, or then at least want to distribute that according to what they want. And then you have volunteer groups who are very, very active in this crisis. And these are, of course, the groups that are helping the refugees, but they are activists. They are very often going against their own governments or the governments of the countries they are working in. So there is a clear conflict, which also makes it then difficult to brand, if you like, this as a humanitarian operation. Because these volunteers, civil society actors, activists are not neutral.
I had a really interesting time recently having to write a code of conduct for the open collaboration channels that we're working on, open coordination channels that just about anyone can join. It was both about protecting the group from the civ-mil coordinators, but also from activists like myself. And so how can we ensure that we're all neutral in this, which is the humanitarian mandate? Because neutrality to me means getting everyone on the same footing, which is kind of an activist perspective, right? But it was, yeah.
Rebecca Sloan, in her book, Paradise Made in Hell, introduced me to the concept of elite panic.
Yeah.
And that seems not to be just an American thing. The idea that the people on the ground who've been affected by all of this stuff, they respond, and then the elites who are not affected look at that response and they see that as a threat, which is that she talks about the San Francisco earthquake, but we surely saw that in New Orleans as well. And I think to a certain extent we're seeing this in the refugee crisis.
What is so interesting in the refugee crisis is that we both have something like an affected community that is affected by a war coming in,
right.
But at the same time we also have some kind of a crisis in the host countries that are split up into several groups. So you have a more layered set of communities and activists who are going, and then also the question, who is the elite? Is it the national governments? Is it also some of the humanitarian agencies who claim to be in control? And so the rest of the world is wondering. It's interesting. I haven't seen that in practice, but so it's certainly.
You also see that in the reports that I see the different responses to it. The different responses in Slovenia, Hungary, Germany, Sweden, Iceland, and so forth. Everybody has a different kind of response based upon what their local politics is. There's another aspect of this which is there's a couple of sisters here in Massachusetts, the O'Neill sisters, who after a disaster in their town in Massachusetts, tornado, started a group called Recovers.org. And what's interesting to me about their work is they looked at what was happening in their town and what were the needs after an natural disaster and how that was organized or not. And so they developed this methodology that they then go out to different communities and say, okay, here's what's going to happen because we know from previous floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, storms, this is what happens with a town. You've got about 10 days worth of but you don't know within those 10 days what your needs are because you can't do an assessment. We can capture all of those gifts that people say, we need to do this, we can do that. And then when you have your assessment, you can go back to those people. So at least for them, there is some kind of framework for an natural disaster situation, so that you can do some of the time shifting that's needed in order to get real response.
And that's also a very important distinction. Just that, it's just important to be clear on what type of disaster we are talking about. And the natural sudden onset disasters has the typical curve, and is in many ways also, particularly with respect to information sharing, with whom you can share information, trust, and what people do with that information, different from such a more complex setting.
One last thing.
Nope. Bring it later. Sorry. Keeping us on time. All right. So Sarah, now then, try to say something.
Hello.
Hello. All right. So I'm going to turn you towards the room so you can see us.
Hi, room.
There's home over there. So we can. No, people online can't see her. Yeah, they'll see whatever is here, and so when she starts sharing her screen, which is my understanding what she's going to do next.
This might not work, so bear with me.
We're going to try it. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Great.
Okay, does that work?
I will signal to you when you're at 5 minutes, and if you start seeing me creep closer to the screen, it means you're over time, okay?
Just cough every minute, okay? So, I asked to just do a short piece because I care very much about the communities in disasters, same as Tina. And when I think about modeling disaster response, by the way, I've actually been part of communities, I've been in disasters, I've worked for the UN, so I've seen the levels here. It helps to include everyone. So Tina mentioned the first responder is your neighbor, that always happens. And when I think about these models of who's doing what where and how the response are happening, I have a bunch of questions. So who is leading? Who is doing? So who is asking for information? Who is leading responses? Who's actually doing the responding? Who's using the data you're producing? And who's benefiting? That little chat I had with Marie about the book about disaster profiteering, there are some interesting transfers from poor to rich going on that have been very visible since Katrina, even with just the land rights in Katrina. So there are all sorts of interacting systems going on. So one thing I find helpful when I'm thinking about what all these levels are, so don't be imperial. I used to write this on my boss's board at the UN, and he'd rub it off and I put it back on his board because it's an easy mistake to make as an NGO to think that you're doing things for people, or even worse, to people. So that to me is very much imperial. For me, it's more interesting. So pro is the imperial model of we're doing this on behalf of you. Here, we've just dumped some stuff on you. We've helped you. Community models where you're working alongside communities. I'll show you some examples of how that's working in disaster response. And the golden for me is the grassroots. It's where communities that are being affected by disasters, and better still, are likely to be affected by disasters, are working out their own responses and their own resiliences. So this is modeled by Richard Heeks that I just find useful for thinking about. Is everyone okay with this?
Yes, we haven't seen you progress through any slides.
Damn it, I've already progressed through one. Hang on, we might have a problem. Okay.
So don't go into full screen, just leave it in the thing. Okay, we saw you zoom in. Click on the next one.
Okay, so I've just left it in the thing.
Yeah, just click on the next one.
So I'll just click on the next one. So this is the Pro Power Per.
Good.
And Willow, you'll recognize the picture. It's Haiti. It's the group we helped in Haiti who are doing grassroots work. Willow can tell you about it afterwards. So at the pro level, the doing things for people, you've got the UN who produce something called 3W. So the who's doing what where. And this is the HXL card. This is a standard we're using or creating as a group to make it easier to share that information across groups. But this is very much from the top level. How do I organize this? How do I arrange this disaster? So next level down, you've got this midway point where you've got groups. So VTC is the volunteer technical community. So you might hear them called crisis mappers. Grassroots mappers can be a little like that. But these are groups typically international, so they're working virtually, they're working across the world. The Standby Task Force responds if it's asked to respond by a group. And usually this is the UN, one of the large NGOs, sometimes a large media organization. So who is leading is that top-level group. Who is doing is the volunteers around the world. Who's using tends to be a top-level group again. This is an Ushahidi deployment for election violence monitoring. So it splits into teams. If you guys want to go back into these slides later, I can kind of go through all of the pieces, but I have 5 minutes. And Willow will get shouty if I don't keep to time. So that's looking at that level between the top-down and the community levels. And another one, this is a slightly different one between those two. So you've got this international community OpenStreetMap, but it very much has local chapters. So this is the map changes. So these are the people who produce an alternative to Google Maps that's open source and open data. And these are the map edits during Typhoon Ruby, which I happened to be underneath at the time. So you can see the local responders, the local groups, just blew it out of the park above everybody else. Mali turned up. Mali's an interesting one. Quite often, if you have a major disaster, the people affected will come and help with the next disaster. So this is a group of people who were affected by Ebola, got helped by virtual responders, and then passed it on to the next emergency, which is kind of nice. So here we have this idea. We've gone from the top level, the UN types. We've gone through the mid level where you've got people around the world who are helping and working with people who are affected and in community, because quite often you've got people in community who aren't badly affected. And then you've got the real grassroots stuff, the para communities. So the Nepal earthquake that happened recently, it seems like a lifetime ago, but it is recent. There was an existing group in Kathmandu called Kathmandu Living Labs, and I think there are a couple of Americans involved, but it's a local team, and they already had the tools and the ability to run up a response very quickly, a data response. And what they did was they created something called QuakeMap, because they saw a confusion between, and the usual confusion between the neighbors who wanted to help but didn't know how to, and the people who had the needs. So they produced this Ushahidi instance, and they coordinated those needs. And this was interesting because this wasn't just a grassroots community producing information about their local area, if you can think of a country as a local area, but they were feeding back to the government. So the Nepalese army came in every hour and picked up a map and picked up a list of needs to go respond to. They were feeding back to international NGOs, and they were feeding back to on-the-ground communities, because even when you lose phone signal, and several of these communities even they lost SMS, but they still kept internet. So you have this strange situation happening now, where you can be in the most god-awful of situations. All hell is going on around you, and you still have connectivity. So it's getting much, much easier to see what's going on. Yeah, I know, it's heavy. Sorry. I'll try to get lighter. I'll tell some bad jokes. Am I doing on time? Because
no, that's what I'm pinging you.
Okay. Oh, you're telling me about hell. That's a hey. Okay. So another system which I think is actually starting to get it completely right is the Philippines. So what we're seeing in the Philippines is PAGASA is the local disaster response agency. And one of the things about groups like the UN is the UNOCHA, the coordinating body, doesn't have the right to tell people what to do. It only has the right to coordinate. So the people who have the right to dictate tend to be the local government. So here you have an agency, it's working with both the local communities. So barangays are very local, so you're talking town/county level organizations. They're working with the grassroots groups, like the OpenStreetMap groups, but they're also working with, hard stop into, I'm almost done. And they're working with the big NGOs, and they are doing resilience, they're practicing ahead, which gets me to the next slide, because I'm going to have to go fast now. So when we talk about resilience, disaster response is what we used to do. The conversation is shifting through to what we can do to, no bad jokes, what we can do to become more, yeah, I mean, I suppose resilience is not the thing, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's the ability to cope with changes. Sorry, I nearly got very recurrent on myself. So how do we make these systems more resilient? How do we make people recover faster? So these are some of the screenshots from the Rockefeller Resilience Initiative. Now, Rockefeller Resilience is top-down. So they have this idea of having a coordinator in each city. So they have 100 cities, and they're looking at how from the top they can build resilience into their infrastructures. But you've also got bottom-up. And Marie, that is not a joke, that's you. So this is idea. So there are tools. Ushahidi is a tool. OpenStreetMap is a tool. There are a whole bag of tools, and they're sitting on this site as a list. And what it means is that anybody can start a response. So you're not just dealing with the big agencies. You're not just dealing with the governments. You're not just dealing with the barangays. You're not just even dealing with the VTCs. You're also dealing with individuals who do something which then becomes a thing. For instance, in Sandy, where an individual decided they'd map all the co-working spaces so people had an office to go to. And you get these emergent responses happening, and working out what they are, tracking them, understanding that as a system is the kind of chewy problem I'd love you guys to look at. Okay, I'm done. I can stop now. Yes.
All right, any questions for Sarah?
They're all asleep?
No, they're all fixed.
I don't know who's best to address this, but it occurs to me that this is an opportunity for wonderful weekend-long models games along the line of war games, so that a group of people in various distributed places have got to come in, and they might be handed a card that says, this team has just been hit with an environmental disaster. A plant blew up, or there's been a 5-year drought. Or they might be, you guys are the university that has the experts, or you guys might be the group with the logistics, so you don't even know coming in where in that hierarchy you're going to be, and these teams coordinate and learn to adapt into the different. I just think it would be a fascinating set of games that on an ongoing basis could train thousands and thousands of people, from everything to how to be in the center at NGOs to how to be the people on the ground when the garage next door falls over in an earthquake.
Yeah.
So the laboratory that I work for is actually creating games for the HE care space, because not only are games an opportunity,
Which the acronym means Humanitarian Assisted Disaster Response.
So not only are games the opportunity to train people who might participate in a response, either because they live in a disaster-prone country or because they're part of this international humanitarian community, but it's also a way to understand how the people who are part of this community, how do they make decisions?
my thought was that if people in repeated encounters played all the different roles, then if they're in one part, they still have the experience of being in the other. And that seems to be the very essence of resilience when ad hoc networks for a particular response are forming themselves.
And in that, the ability to, in essence, create this first-person player situation where, in my experience, if you take a member of the United States military, particularly somebody at a leadership level, where they're accustomed to making decisions, and you put them in a position where they are part of the affected population, and now it's not just you're a recipient, but seeing how what they are trying to do can be undermined by saviors who have come in and helped them, and how it really is fascinating to see that how for the first time they have that opportunity.
So this is already going on.
It's kind of going on. It's also it's difficult to support sometimes. So there have been events like Strong Angel, which was a scenario like this, but an event. It was more about a bunch of people from different backgrounds coming together into one space to try to learn how to make their tools interoperable. And it still continues as something called Camp Roberts, which happens on a quarterly basis. But people forget how valuable it is. And so even though the people who are attending get a lot out of it, it slowly loses its funding, and then it dies out over a few
work
years.
to set up a war game. You really have to think through how you're going to play the game in a way that the real world information will be real in the circumstance where
The UN disaster response people, I understand, they do this for training, and they do it in such a way that you're also working straight out for 72, 84 hours and things like that, so they put people under a lot of different pressure. I'm interested in the package of tools that's available for the grassroots. So I wanted to ask Sarah, how many tools are available and how widely known are they around the world for grassroots groups?
Oh, there are dozens of them. Some are very well known. So OpenStreetMap, Ushahidi, Sahana are well known. Some are very much less well known. Some of that is how well things are marketed. Some of that is just having a place that coordinates them. The last page I put up, the coordinator for that site is in the group chat. So Marie, would you like to take this one? No.
Hi, I'm sorry. I was just, I'm sorry, what was the question? I apologize.
How many tools are there? Are they well known? So what's the tool landscape like?
Oh, I mean, there is a lot, and we're just scratching the surface. I think we have about 50 listed on resiliencecollab.org, and we're developing a taxonomy. I mean, there's just, the problem is that it's completely uncoordinated, and everybody wants to reinvent the wheel. And we see that a lot, particularly at a grassroots level. You know, if I had a cent for every sort of donation platform that I got sent to me, I'd be a very rich woman. So I think what the focus really needs to be is, and that's what we're doing, is mapping out the landscape and figuring out what's already there, and then working with other tech providers so that we make sure that our tools are interoperable. So really, we're kind of entering sort of a data standard and compatibility phase, I think, from where I'm standing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the tools are important, but data.
Room, and then you can go.
It's also interesting. Side remark, some of these tools are so complex that they are almost mimicking the complexity of society. And I'm working in one of the research projects with the European Resilient Cities, who are trying to work with the Rockefeller Foundation. They have an interesting scheme how to measure or operationalize resilience, and it's commonly referred to by our cities as the wheel of death. Because it is so complex and has so many facets. But it's really interesting also how these cities are working together when they compare the issues that one had in place in the the other is still seeing upcoming, despite their very different context and setting.
Thank you. Sarah, you get the closing comment.
I do.
Yeah, you had a thing to say, and then we're going to move on to the next thing.
So basically, just don't forget the communities. There's a lot of people involved in a disaster. Don't just model one piece of it.
Cool, thank you. All right, so I'm going to give you a presentation now, which is something that I don't usually do. Does everybody want a 10-minute break first, or are we ready to, like, keep going? Keep going? Okay, cool. All right, then I'm going to bring this over here. Do. All right. So, that's not what I want. This is what I want. Will this work? Who knows? Yeah. Okay. So this is the comic that I insist on showing. I'm going to also time myself. How about that one? If I'm going to be that hard for
5 minutes or else.
I'm going to try for 5 minutes, but that means I'm going to go real fast. This is my complex system, well, Amir and my complex systems framing of the Superstorm Sandy response. Okay, so taking complex science and applying it to disaster response. This is the comic that I insist on showing before everything because this is my sense of humor, which is people helping people in the aftermath of tragedy is the only really convincing argument for people, and then the mouse over is always in the shadow of a stronger argument against. Like, we are the causes of our disasters. The reason they're not just natural events is because we exist in building these places, like, right? It's we put our city on that fault line. What were we thinking? All right, so what we plan for is here. If we have a fire department and on a range from no ability to handle a fire to ready to fight the biggest fire we've ever heard of, we might have a set of volunteer firefighters and a fire truck, and then maybe we our city gets bigger and so we expand, and maybe we even have an extra volunteer branch, right? We get some more people in. And on a range from no ability to handle a fire, we do pretty well, right? We train, but when official organizations train for things, they get right at the cusp of this because they don't want to kill morale and they can't imagine something bigger that's ever happened. And plus, she's like, this is what we have, so we're going to push the limits of what we have. But fires, sadly, not sentient, and don't care what you've planned for, right? And so our disasters keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so while this is what we plan for, what actually happens is over here, right? That's what we've been hearing about in a lot of these conversations. So this is me. I'm not going to show you all this because this is for another thing. This is how I draw all the stick figures. Hooray. All right, so we're going to talk about Superstorm Sandy response. If I'm a large organization like FEMA or the Red Cross, I send out these massive units of response, right? Because that's the scale that I operate at. If we're looking at complexity science, we can look at, I can do things at a massive scale, but they're really simple, right? I can send out a block of blankets. I can send out a block of food, whatever else, right? We have demolitions and cleaning. We have warmth. We have food and water. And then we deploy into the parking lot of a box store because that's the only place that our scale can fit. We have these semis and whatever else, and we deploy, and this is where the lines can happen, right, where everybody has to leave their house, right? The people actually live over here. They don't live near the box store. How's that ever happen? And so I'm supposed to leave my house in order to stand in line in order to get whatever materials they have available. And we're all leaving our houses, and we're all already stressed out because we're not sure what's going to happen to our house, and maybe we have a sick family member there and whatever else, right? Etc. Okay. So, and maybe the first set of people that show up mostly need food and water. And so when this group goes back to the large organization and says, here's what we need in the next shipment, it's all about what's already been taken, right? And so then they ship that out, but in fact, we actually needed more demolition and food for the second round of people, right? There are all these delays in this system that are not actually useful. It's too simple, etc. Everybody with me so far? Is this pace tolerable? Okay, cool. All right. So let's talk about Superstorm Sandy response. We have an okay sense of how large organizations work. We have all this organizational theory, organizations, etc. Hey, Sarah, will you put yourself on mute if you are doing the thing? Thank you. Okay, so we know about this, but what about this over here? Because we know people are doing things. That's what Sarah and Tina have just talked about a lot. I like to say that in response, we're not giving people voice. People have already been speaking. We're just finally creating our own mechanisms to actually hear them, right? We're not giving people voice ever. All right, so we're going to talk about this and how knowledge is actually being transferred through the network. So a lot of people are confused about how networks work, networks of people. And so this is what the bulk of that paper is about. Part of it is about surfacing knowledge to a local topic node. So if I am a kitchen at 520 Clinton, which is one of the Sandy response centers, how do I make information available to myself? And so that happened through lots of signage, and you see like, oh my goodness, I added this. These are really important. This is great. Cross something out, right? So we're like just inhabiting the space. This doesn't have to go online. No one else needs to know about this, right? It only matters to me unless we start to look at like what the overall trends are, and then we can get into that. But in the nitty-gritty in the moment, we don't need to share with other people. Then we have sharing knowledge across topic in a shared location. So kitchen, distribution, orientation, intake, whatever else, right? All these different groups that are in the same area, how do they share information to one another? And so that happened with meetings. And a lot of people, you know, I, as an activist, my time's up. Is it okay if I go for 3 more minutes that I gave everyone else? Sorry, be slightly cirky. I love you guys. So this happened during meetings, and a lot of people are snarky about how much time Occupy spent in meetings. But have you ever spent time with FEMA? They spend just as much time in meetings, and the meetings here were in order to equip people to make their own choices in the field, versus FEMA, where the meetings were about declaring what people should do in the field and then checking back about whether or not it works. Right? Difference, I arguably spent just as much time in meetings for both groups. And this is how we shared that, oh, if I change this thing and how we're packing up food in the kitchen, it makes distribution's job easier, right? So that knowledge transfer also matters. And then we had transfer knowledge to a shared topic at a different locale. So if I'm in, again, kitchen in 520, and I go to kitchen at Jacoby, I might do this thing where I take a damp towel and I lay it out under my cutting board, so then it doesn't move when I cut things, which means I'm less likely to cut myself, which means I'm less likely to bleed all over things, right? That's not something I'm going to bring up in a meeting, but that's something that when I'm interacting with other people, I pick up as tacit knowledge. Good? Okay. So those are the main forms of this. There was also, and how this happened was that people were expected to, over the course of the week, take 1 day off and 1 day either in the field or at a different group. And so there's this expectation that you're constantly going out and interacting with other people. And 1 day in the field, right? That's the, hey, remember why we're here? Go take a look at it. Okay, so knowledge across the network, and then knowledge transfer to another network. So this was both to Google Crisis Maps and also to then Occupy Oklahoma. So it's a different network, but one of them is at the same time on the same topic, and the other one is a different topic at a different time. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So this is what I was so proud of with Occupy Sandy, was that they had the map of where people's needs and offers were through that grassroots indicator, but only people who knew to look at Occupy knew about the map. And so because we have people like me and my friends that spend a lot of time in a lot of different groups, I got one of the people from the Occupy map and one of the people from Google Crisis Map on a call at the same time, and I was like, let's do this thing. And so then you'll notice that before, all of Google Crisis Maps are official sources. They're all official sources, which means they're vetted, and we have that control, right, of what the messaging is, but it's also super slow versus the Occupy map, which was live, it was updated by the people, et cetera. And having that mix is really interesting, and it allows for both of those standards. Okay. It allows your volunteers to come in and take care of their own damn fires, right? Hooray. All right. So I'm not going to go over the rest because I have 12 seconds left. Good? Tarifa is a water mapping thing. I'll tell you about it later. Okay. So this was like, Occupy Sandy was about emergent response that did this. And then something like Tarifa is about, well, what did we learn from this, and can we design a new system with these things in mind?
Can I add a comment?
Yes, please do.
So Willow and I have been working on writing up her experience and information that we can learn from us.
Yeah.
Turn that away. In the earlier discussion, there's something that sort of a picture that comes out of this. I think is really important thinking about sort of how do we frame the way community response and organized response can interact with each other. And the idea is the following. As Willow explained it to me, the natural way that community response works is that there are places in the community that are natural gathering places where people will go when there's an emergency. Community centers, churches, other locations. And those places are natural gathering points for the community. And at those places, people go and help each other with whatever the needs are. They let each other know what kind of help is needed. In the meantime, as Willow said, there are these big box stores where the major organizations are working. What happened with the Occupy Sandy response is that the volunteers went to the community centers and engaged with the local community in their efforts. And they co-located, if you will, with the community itself, additional resources, people that could help and respond to whatever the local needs were. So we have a set of community nodes, if you will, in the network, which are the natural nodes that the community itself is responding. And so what's happening is there's an augmented neighborhood response from the people that are coming from outside. At the same time, there were some additional nodes which were uniquely Occupy Sandy nodes that help in interface from the outside into these nodes that were mix of Occupy Sandy and local people. And the other statement that one makes is that the framework of the Occupy movement is not we're going to help you, but there's a mutual aid statement. And so, in fact, the community members became just as much part of the Occupy as the Occupy became part of the local response. I think that this picture of a natural network of nodes, along with external nodes, shows, if you will, how the external aid becomes part of the local community, does not disrupt the natural structure that it already has, which is important in a complex systems frame where you want to then be able to walk away and continue to have the community be the way it was originally.
Yes,
I suggest that the position where that community node can be feeding data directly to the sender, the shipper, so it doesn't even get staged in the way that it has been at that bulk store.
Yeah.
I have another question on that because it seems to be informed to a large extent by geographic proximity. Is that the only proximity that plays a role, particularly when we also talk about information in the wrong bad place? That's one aspect to it. And then, because I've just recently been working so much on that, what does that say about the situation where you have mobile population, migration? Yep. How do you work?
You're asking me or asking?
I'm asking anyway.
I think what I would say, just is that proximity matters.
Yeah.
For many things. It doesn't mean that it always dominates the nature of communication or information work. So it's very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as how does the digital factor into this, which is one of my main questions also, is I wonder about how we perform mutual aid, meaning your struggle is my struggle, right? Like the whole solidarity, not charity thing. It's the with, not to or for. Is how do we perform mutual aid at a global scale, like across our different communities? And so much of that to me is this digital part. And the thing about a disaster situation is that the needs of the community, even more so than usual, are exceeded by their capacity, right? The community cannot take care of itself. Otherwise, they already would have, right? And so there is a need for external intervention, external help in some way, external something. And so that's where, to me, the digital factors in, because the digital is helping to document needs and voices and coordination in ways that we haven't been able to before, such that a remote party can't help. And so that's where Standby Task Force and other groups come in, and that they'll help you parse through all of the data that Unity is making, as well as what the external factors are. Does that make sense? Okay.
And that proximity, now in a mobile era where we can be apprised of what is happening in the community we're heading towards, is proximity to the resource. So you can still be mobile, you're heading towards a resource, and they know that you're on your way. They can prepare for that. You can be available to that resource.
But I was there also talking about these meeting points, about these nodes. Because if you have mobile communities, do you then really want to put them in these camps or in border crossing points? Because that is not something like a natural meeting place where you can have a comfortable conversation. It's a miserable situation when you cross the border, and this would also be great research topic to look at these dynamic.
And we can step forward into combining Uber and Airbnb to greet an individual and bring them into a host family.
That is being done.
Yeah, that's my point. It's like that's our next step, I think, is this one-to-one distributed.
So one of the things that I would love to see a group like Airbnb embark upon, and I've talked to their head of emergency services, is like one of the most disruptive things that happens during evacuation is the splitting apart of family units and community units. And now that we have social networks, like if people are opting into you knowing who they're connected to, why can't we take an entire community and replace them together within these networks of housing, right? Whether it's a bunch of mobile homes again, or whether it's a bunch of Airbnb apartments. Like you should still be able to be proximal to the people that you've been close to in the past, whether that's emotionally or physically.
I see this as the next step of tools that are still required to allow individual ad hoc networks to self-organize and retain their privacy, security, and communication. So relying on Twitter and Airbnb and all these external, that's just our current state. I think we need to move forward into a thing that protects autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely.
There might be a case study of what happened with keeping the internet open in Haiti, which is, and a lot of the people involved in that were at Tufts. And that might be an interesting thing to look at, that experience. How do they keep that one line going into Port-au-Prince open with the help of people from Tufts? The other thing is that the mutual aid has come up a couple of times. Voluntary networks, Kropotkin, Anarchism, the book by that title, Mutual Aid, might be interesting to go back and look at that.
It's just interesting when thinking about mobile populations and whether they're internally displaced persons or actual refugees who have had to flee their native country. In terms of IDP camps and just internally displaced and then refugee camps, for one, those really do undermine that community's ability to advocate for yourself, because the power is truly within the camp management, because they tell you food is delivered here. Your toilets are there, you're a dwelling, whether it's something like a toilet shelter or just literally like a lean-to with a park on it. You know, it's fascinating, and you hear from the humanitarian community, it's the best way we can do it. I mean, we need to know, they want that community contained so they can do things, and important things, distributing food and water, distributing immunization. But it's also fascinating, there's this professor, Matt Jalasik, and he's actually a professor of architecture, but he gave this great presentation on refugee camps. You can overlay a map from the Roman army to a refugee camp. Like the Roman army camps were always set up the same way, so you would know exactly, even though you're 30 miles from where you were yesterday, where to find the general. Well, that's what we do with refugee and IDP camps. And then we haven't really thought of, what does this mean? What does it mean for gender-based violence? What does it mean for splitting up families depending on when particular members arrive at the camp itself? But I don't see a strong sense of urgency to change how we organize refugee IDP.
Yeah, one of the things about refugee camps is that they're present on that land at the permission of the host area, right? The host community, the host country, etc. And part of it is the assumption that it will be temporary. And so this horrible thing happens where you're a refugee for a reason, right? You left for a reason, and that's probably the things were super shitty where you were coming from. But if you get the refugee camp up to or even exceed human dignity and human rights, you're making it so much better than where people came from that they probably won't want to leave. And so it's this really bizarre and awful tension, but heaven forbid that we actually go and help Somalia be better or somewhere else so that people don't want to leave, right? Instead we argue about whether or not the camps should be as good as they are. That's me ranting. Sorry. Yes.
Well, it seems like there's a really basic trade-off between the refugee camp being like legible to people in charge of it and people actually self-organizing things the way that makes sense to them. And I don't really know how you bridge that.
The question that is not easy to address, which you're kind of raising, is what's the exit point? I mean, so refugee camps are designed to separate the people from the community in which they're in, because the assumption is there's some other exit point going back to where they came from, and assuming that there's going to be a change there, and what happens when that extends.
If I wanted to study that, and I wanted to say what are successful examples in the last century of refugee camps and refugee populations, refugee camps that have been set up, occupied, and eventually emptied, closed down, and made unneeded, I wouldn't even know where to look to find out about the successful examples.
I think they're probably, my guess is that I don't know. I know that in Yugoslavia, people went back to it after the intervention. The intervention happened within a short enough time frame that there was, people went back. Now, whether it was wise what they did, I mean, we have analysis that says that they did the wrong thing in the way that people returned to their home. But that's a separate question, right? But we also, of course, have examples of 50 years later that people
Exactly. So I'm wondering if there's somewhere a library of refugee camp knowledge that you say, oh, here's successful examples. These in this part of the world that were, and here's what happened. It seems like it's a niche in history that I wouldn't know, well, not my specialty, but I wouldn't know where to look for the successful examples from the models.
I think those are the ones that just faded more quickly.
But there's another way to take a cut of that is to look at temporary buildings that have lasted for a long time. And so here you can look at Building 20 at MIT, right? Which was a World War II temporary building that lasted for 30, 40 years. Right? And when it was torn down, people were going, oh, how did it torn down? And there are a number of instances of that kind of stuff that you could maybe use as a different lens to look at refugee camps. What is it that lasts about the temporary? It's something that's designed for the temporary.
Yeah. I don't know.
One last thing is, when architecture students are assigned the project of design a refugee camp or an emergency shelter, they're given a blank slate. They're not given, this is what the UN gives out. They're not asked to deal with what people actually have to deal with. That's my experience from watching things happen.
I don't know that architecture students are being asked that question.
I've seen an exhibit a few years ago at Graduate School of Design at Harvard where they did that. And it's all blue sky. None of it deals with the reality on the ground. Here's a window frame, here's a door frame, here's some sheets of plywood.
Yeah, I mean, we have the sphere standards because we figured out how to keep people alive, right? We know that we have to keep the tents X number of meters apart in order to prevent a fire from spreading. Right. We know that people need X number of gallons of potable water. Potable, I never know. Potable, thank you, drinking water to eat and clean and cook and drink. So we know all of that, and yet the best way I can describe it is it's like you cheated at SimCity. Right. It doesn't feel real. If you've been in those cities that people like the design city where they planned the whole thing before anyone moved in, like we still have not figured that out, and yet we expect people to live in that. Yes.
It's maybe a peripheral thing, but it seems really frustrating. Here we are connecting networks of millions of human beings, but all these organizations, aid groups, millions of dollars, donors, funders, the whole community of networking, all the stuff is still acting in a very passive role to public policy and what politicians and warmongers are doing. So we have a situation where like this massive community certainly comprise a response that might inform policy and prevent things. We're not really answering that question of it either. Like prevent the conflicts and that people power sort of rise above those things. Because the folks running the show, it's clearly obvious they have no idea what they're doing.
Well, that to me is where the humanitarian mandate of neutrality is so soul grinding, is that you can't get involved in the political side, right? If you're going to be neutral, you can't actually get involved in the parts that prevent the atrocities from happening.
Then you'll be prevented from organizing. You'll be prevented from visiting the people in need. You'll be prevented from setting up the camps. We're in a real world. We're not starting.
But it actually makes sense if you think about it, because the people who are intervening in order to prevent the population being in them should not necessarily be the same people as the ones who are setting up the humanitarian response, because they're different skill sets and different capabilities. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do both. Right. So we should be engaged in both, but not necessarily the same organization.
When citizens self-organize, they don't want conflict. The refugees right now.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I don't think that's
I
true
think
either.
a lot of times citizens self-organize and they create mobs and pogroms and all kinds of stuff. There's been a lot of citizen self-organization.
And violence is,
one of the main communal violence
globally.
So Sarah wants to jump in with something. Do you want to jump in?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. So you're actually being imperial, guys. So you're talking about refugee camps as a thing that you design, not as something that gets co-designed with the refugees. And I've been occasionally asked to help with refugee camp design and issues in existing camps. Hell knows why. But I've seen two very good but quite different examples. So Turkey has a reputation for building high-quality camps that actually respect the people going into them. But the other side of good is the camps where the people who live in that camp aren't treated almost as like prisoners or people, things that happen to them, but have some say in how they're laid out. They have some say in what happens and the design of that camp. One flashpoint always seems to be playgrounds. You put playgrounds into a refugee camp, and in a way that's kind of talking about permanence and people and what people need. Not just you're just staying here for a bit. We'll pretend it's temporary. But the point where there seems to be a difference is when you start seeing the shops. So when you start seeing normal humanity, those things are normal humanity. So somebody sets up a small shop in front of their tent. Somebody starts, projecting cinema. It's that community and commerce. And it's very easy to just to think imperially about we are these people who need to design these camps for these other people. Please just think community. Sorry, I'm done.
I think that goes back actually to the other comment that we're making also, which is that, again, going back to the other kind of emergency response, the question is, what is the relationship between those who are responding to the emergency and the normal structures of society that are present either in place, i.e. where the emergency response is taking, or in the case of refugees, what is the extent to which one wants normal societal functions to grow? And again, in the latter case, there's a different statement, right? In the former case, the assumption is that the healthy, normal society is what was there before. And what you want to do is to ensure that you get over a tough spot and then recreate the circumstances of its function. In the refugee circumstances, in some sense, it's the opposite. You don't want to create normal existence because you don't want that to become the normal state of affairs. You want them to go back to where they were before and have their normal existence removed in the previous
location.
That depends on the dynamics.
I wonder if Jordan is ground zero for this kind of thing. Because Jordan has accepted more Syrian refugees than any other country, or close to it. They had the Palestinians before that, so Sabra and Shatila are now Syrian refugee camps. And what's the experience? What's the history there? How are they dealing with that much smaller country than Germany, dealing with a larger amount of refugees? And if we help Jordan, would that mean that there's less people going to the EU?
That's
Or
what the EU wants. It's not working with Turkey and trying to have them keep the refugees there to prevent them from coming in.
There's I think the Twitter account Illicit Economy is from a Jordan refugee camp, which is the UN Innovation Lab decided to try to support the refugee camp and what they wanted to do. So what Sarah was talking about of like letting people set up the economies instead of getting in their way, supporting them in that. And it's turned into a really interesting study. So it's Illicit Economy on Twitter.
So this raises a point that we were talking about some earlier, which is that one of the things that happened over the last year is that the World Food Program, presumably due to constraints, was distributing less food in Syria and in the refugee camp. And all of a sudden, the refugees are going to Europe. And the fact that the needs were not taken care of, presumably in the more local circumstances, presumably is a major driver for the more extended migration.
The big debate is
I'm not saying
it's like so WFP has created less food, but they're also trying to move towards vouchers and cash donations, which is always also difficult in terms of accountability and nobody really knows what to push that. And apparently it's also a fact that people that are going to Europe do not necessarily come to the refugee camps because there are all these informal settlements with people like this trying to live somewhere. And it's also just the fact that the conflict has been getting worse and worse and that people need hope seems to be one of the drivers. And not saying that's all of it, but it's just a massive push out of these countries and trying to have some notion of hope.
And just remember that Rojava is actually freeing some of these villages so that people can move back. But we want to bomb Rojava all the time, even though they're the only ones actually helping out a whole lot. Michelle, did you have a point? Then what I would love to do is I'm getting so much out of this discussion, but I'm also aware that we are taking everyone's cognitive bandwidth in single channel communication. And so I'd love it if we took the last half hour of this to just hang out and talk in smaller groups about these things. We can either do this by going around the room and in a very heavily facilitated way, figuring out what those breakout groups would be, or we could just talk to our neighbors. There's also pizza. So how about we just linger around the pizza table, thank you for providing, Maxie, and talk about these or other things more. And I am so appreciative of all of you. I've learned a lot.
Let me just say something. We're really bringing things to a close. Let me say this topic is a topic that's of deep interest to us. If you would like to work with us and figure out how we can move things forward, this I think is a really good time. And maybe we should. Why don't we go around one more time and let people at least articulate their interest in what's the next step, and then we can use that as a motivation for the conversation around pizza.
That sounds good. All right, Anne, do you want to lead us out?
Next step. I want to know how you want to work on it. What if there's a relationship between the way you want to work on it and what I might be able to provide. I'd like to understand that.
I think I said it at the end of my presentation, so I'm also very, very much interested in this topic. And for me, it's about seeing the difference that digital forms of information and communication can provide in many ways. But I'm certain it has a transformative power that can also help communities to get on their feet again, whatever that may mean. But
there's more to that than just data collection and data harvesting or statistical analysis. So it's more about engaging in new forms of communication. And I will certainly be working on that, and I'm happy to work with you.
Great. Well, this is all kind of useful, so I think I can see to get more knowledge, but I was kind of fascinated by the idea of having a recipe destination.
We'll come back.
Haiti is in our Western Hemisphere, the poorest country by far in the hemisphere. 200,000 people died in a snap of a finger in Haiti. Twice as many almost died. And I read something like $14 billion approximately were pledged. I just wonder what happens when something is pledged. What is the pipeline between pledge and actual stuff on the ground?
Yeah. Yeah.
Question, and the number of committees doing that. I'm curious. I'd love to work more on the question of when we're responding after people have moved through in the refugee crisis, they've moved through the issue of being in a temporary space, and they find community. Usually, you find a community in a city, and then that's the place where you draw your family and your friends towards, and you build a small network there. How can we help those communities that have formed in hundreds of places actually create a network that reaches back into the refugee camp and people who are just arriving, instead of thinking of it as a problem that the governments have to deal with? Because maybe it's not a question for the governments. Maybe it's a question that we can answer as a DMS.
At IBM, we're working with a small group internally, volunteering to create a platform that allows citizens at the grassroots level to input their needs. That's a project I've been talking about for years, something I don't know if I can complete that work within IBM, but I'd really like to continue that question. How do you allow ad hoc networks, kind of like a Bluetooth model, where a group advertises what they are, what they need, how they interact, and then any group anywhere can all sort of interact on that level, sharing data and helping self-organization. And I think that answers a lot of these other questions. We could totally eliminate corruption, create transparency from donor to in need, if we allow people to tell and guide the process. So I'm really interested in connecting that.
Is IBM here or IBM
here? I'm in Littleton. Yeah, the bulk of the group is in Colorado, but it's a global organization. We work together constantly. So.
I would be interested to hear further about what you guys are working on and find out if there's anything where my skills would be of any use. Nothing more specific than that. You wrote to me, so you have my contact information.
One of the things that I saw at the Sandy response was that 350.org was working with and I was really surprised that 350 never talked about that more. I say solar is in effect. My bike likes it's still very familiar with solar. This is solar hand crank. You can rig it so that it can charge the battery. This is solar, and it uses regular AA batteries, but somehow the technology isn't really made available. I know people in India now are making lights like this for $1 a piece in production costs. There are things for desalinization of water, purification of water, cooking, all these kinds of technologies which are simple, available, almost can be made out of scrap, and they're not put into play. I'm also interested in that Occupy Sandy 350, because what Sandy did was it got communities all up and down the northeast coast to start thinking about the next disaster in relationship to climate change. And that's changed here in Boston, it's changed here in New York. And as we go forward with zero net energy buildings, island and microgrids, all of those kinds of things are going to come into play. And the network that you're putting out over there, the rebuilding in New York and New Jersey to a certain extent is beginning to have self-supporting nodes so that communities can gather there in emergencies and disasters. But how do we do that more? How do we accelerate that?
I'm going to skip really quick to Misha because I remember you needing to leave in sort of short order, yeah?
Yes, sorry about that. So I think the idea of modeling this system is it is a wicked problem, but a problem that I think is fascinating and would actually inform so many things in terms of resiliency, building back better, and how disaster response actually happens, and how you could leverage ongoing humanitarian and development work into that resiliency if a country does experience a disaster. So I'm really interested in that. And then again, just my research in general really focuses around particularly the U.S. military. And so I spend a lot of time thinking through and working with the military, trying to understand what military technology and assets can we and should we, because that's a different way to think about it, should we leverage to do both humanitarian assistance and disaster relief.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought looking at the historical modeling for successful disaster would be
Paul, did you have anything you could
Yeah, I'm curious about the end of the story because I'm with Gary that it's not very likely that these people will come to their homes. So how is the capacity of the whole society to absorb and to get all these together?
I'm sort of interested in parsing out the kind of strategic and tactical that you were saying about what things we want, where we want to grow normalcy, and where we want to have things that kind of reverse like that.
I must have been out of the room when you introduced what was happening.
Individual response about what we do and do.
Yeah, I'm just, interested in more of the history of successes and failures in this.
I think I'm really interested in the narrative and sort of the media portrayals. And one thing that really stuck out to me was your point that large organizations don't, they kind of have an edge of where they plan to and can't imagine anything beyond that. Except it seems like every small police department imagines like an armed insurgency that demands a tank as a response. So I think it'd be really interesting to kind of look at, which threats are people interested in planning all the way out for and kind of what that says about priority.
And what's the actuality and what's the Venn diagram of that? There's the entire field of disaster sociology talks about this, and the book Paradise Built in Hell is a really great synopsis of a lot of that.
Yeah, it's on my reading.
Do you have any closing comments?
Thank you. Go ahead.
I have one thing I want to say, which is there's been a lot of censorship of the spontaneous buildings that refugees have been building recently. I saw a picture of a cardboard hut, but you couldn't enlarge it to see where it was and what it was. So the coverage by the press feeds into the idea that it's a top-down solution. And the ability for people to design something is very much there, but it's also not particularly fostered or protected at any level.
So Let me just say, I don't know, Will, do you want to say a couple of words? I just want to thank everyone for coming. And just, again, let me know that we are interested and engaged in building forward with a project that you would like to work with us on.
Thanks, everyone.
Why don't we have some food?
Goodbye, Internet.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah and Marie, for being here. Also, has my hair looked like that the entire time? Oh, God.
You just blew.
All right, I'm going to copy paste. Thank you, Marie. I'm going to copy paste our chat log into where we were taking notes. And then we distill it down into a blog entry. And then we'll post it to the internet.
Okay.
But I'll share it to everyone beforehand so that you're sure that you were represented in the way that you want and I didn't make any errors and things like that.
And we've taken out the swear words and whatever. Done. Go in, eat pizza. Bye, you. Bye.